All right. So thank you for coming. We are Edge, the Entrepreneurship and Discovery, working out of Sheridan College, and we are happy to have you here today for evaluating the impact of your social enterprise. Before we get started, I do want to start with the land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that the land in which we gather has been and still is the traditional territory of several Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. Since time immemorial, numerous Indigenous nations and Indigenous people have lived and passed through this territory. We recognize that this territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which emphasizes the importance of joint stewardship, peace, and respectful relationships. Sheridan affirms it's our collective responsibility to honor and respect those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who have yet to come. And we are grateful for the opportunity to be working and living on this land. Our roadmap for today is as follows. We're going to do a couple welcome and introductions. Then we're going to follow through with the presentation provided by the lovely Marlene. Then we'll make our way through some question and answer with the audience and move into some breakout rooms. And finally, we will wrap up and close. Before we begin, just make sure that as we're running through the session, you keep your microphone muted so that we don't have too much dissonance, but do feel free to either raise your hands or ask questions when prompted. The session will be recorded, so if anybody has any issues with that, please let me know after the fact and we can work something out. The webcam is not mandatory for your participation in the session, but highly encouraged. We'd love to see your faces. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to use the chat function. I will be monitoring the chat function alongside some of the support staff as well as Marlene today, just so that we can make sure that we're answering any and all questions that you each have for the day. And without further ado, I will actually stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Marlene.
Excellent.
To continue.
So while I'm just setting up the presentation, what I'm sort of wondering is if I can get people to just share whether if you want to just put a 1 in the chat box if you were here last week and 2 if you weren't. And I can just get an idea of how many people were not here last week, just to have an idea of just in case I need to do sort of a more detailed review. So that would be great.
As of the way it looks right now, we've got 2 1s and 3 2s. So about half of the participants today were not here.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just start quickly then and give just for people who weren't here who may not know me, just really quickly. I'm a full-time faculty member at Sheridan in the Faculty of Applied Health and Community Studies. I was hired in 2016 to be a part of a team that developed the Bachelor of Community Safety degree. And a big component of that is a course in program evaluation. So I've developed that course as well as other research methods courses. So my PhD is in sociology from McMaster University, where my study and my passion was studying the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade using historical statistical methods. I looked at the social and economic reasons for abolition. And so then that sort of transformed into my work with the government, where my main file was human trafficking. So I worked for the Victims and Vulnerable Persons Division as a senior research evaluation analyst, and part of that was actually doing program evaluation. So what I want to say to everybody tonight is I tried to create some tools for you. Like this is just 2 sessions that you're coming to. So last week and this week. And normally when I do this, it's just 1 session and it's a 3-hour session. If you feel confused, that's okay. Because if you're feeling confused, that means you're actually thinking about things. And just remember that you're not going to learn program evaluation in such a short amount of time. These sessions are sort of to get the ball rolling for you and to give you the tools that you need to look at how you might evaluate your social enterprise. Okay, so I don't expect you to walk out of today's session with a level of expertise. But what I do expect you to have is just an understanding of what program evaluation is, what the problem statement should be for your social enterprise, and then maybe just get a start on creating a logic model. And why do I say get a start? Well, because you're going to revise it, right? So the workbook that I created was really tailored for you to go through each step in these workshops and complete it. But remember, it's a working model. Okay, so I just want to say that to all of you, just in case you feel like, oh, I should know more than what I actually know. So tonight we're going to talk about efficiency assessments and impact evaluations. And if you remember last week, we talked about the first two types of program evaluation, which were evaluability assessments and needs assessments. And I'm going to review that tonight for those of you who weren't here. And I also think it will be good for people who were here to have a little bit of a review, because it's a lot of information the first week in a short amount of time. Then we'll talk about when we towards the end of the session, we'll talk about different types of evaluation challenges and different types of evaluations that exist. And I'll also talk about a little bit more about research methods, about how you might go about evaluating your social enterprise. So my goal is for you to leave this workshop with some basic ideas or strategies on how to plan an evaluation, okay, of either a program, project, or even a product that you're working on, okay? Sort of how I run these sessions are no questions are out of line. So if you have a question, please feel free to either ask it in the chat box and Cole can relay it to me, or just come on the microphone. It's a very relaxed atmosphere. I want you all to feel relaxed. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask, okay? So don't feel afraid. There are no questions that are out of line. So what is program evaluation? Okay, so when we think about program evaluation, we're looking at either a project or an activity or a product that your social enterprise engages in. And what we want to do is look at how successful or how needed is that particular project, product, or project. Okay, so that's what we're looking at, just in a nutshell, in a broad nutshell. And last week, if you remember, we talked about, like, the first thing about doing program evaluation is creating a problem statement. Right? You need to have that problem statement to guide how you frame your program evaluation. So then we talked about there are 7 different types of program evaluations, and we're only really covering 4 because the other types of program evaluation, which we'll touch on later on in this session, are really for really well-established programs that have been around for many years, and generally they're like a program review that would take a team of 5 people to do. That's not something I would ever expect you or any of my students to ever engage in. So that's why we're kind of keeping it simple. So last week we talked about evaluability assessments and needs assessments. So I thought we would start by having you, and for those of you who weren't here last week, that's totally fine. You can still participate in this session, and I'll just remind you, what I'm going to ask you to state is your problem statement in 6 words or less on the Jamboard. Now, for those of you who weren't here last week, a problem statement, what it does is just articulates a particular problem that your social enterprise is trying to solve, okay? So the problem should frame a particular challenge that your population is facing and something that you're trying to solve. You can do that through a project, through a program, an actual program that has several activities, or you can do it through a product. Some social enterprises develop products, right? So so just think, let's take about 4 or 5 minutes. Think about what your problem statement is and try and condense it, and we'll get you to put that on the Jamboard.
I realize I am muted. I will begin to show the Jamboard. So the way the Jamboard works is I will share the link with everybody here so everybody can actually view and edit. And that will be pasted in the chat so that you each have the chance to participate. Give me a moment to see if I can actually open up the chat because I can't see. There we go. So if any of you click on that link, it'll bring you to this page. If you are aiming to add to the chat on the left side here, you can see that there's a little sticky note option. If you click on the sticky note, You can type in whatever you like, change the colors, adjust, and post. You can resize it and place it as you like. So this is how you can use it and add in your additions for your problem statement.
And just keep in mind that your problem statement, you know, it really, usually it's very simple, but people overthink it. So like, you have to just think, what are you, in a nutshell, what are you trying to do, right? Are you trying to combat social, like, because you're social enterprises, right? Are you trying to combat social inequality, right? That's a really broad description. Are you trying to increase, or enhance gender participation in the workforce? Like, there could be, you can just keep it very broad, but it's a good way to guide your actual program evaluation. And when you're doing program evaluation, to have that right in front of you, so it always guides everything that you do. That's great. I'm assuming that is Elizabeth. That's great.
Yep. The last time I had my video on, I became your person. So I'm like, I'm going to stick to a picture this time. I got no break. I got no.
You, sorry.
No. Honestly, I thought about it. I did not feel picked on at all. I just honestly don't have the brain space today. So I don't
worry. I'm not, don't worry about that. No worries.
Pick away. It's all good. Happy to help.
It looks like I had to delete one of them because I accidentally covered the entire page. Can you please retype that?
Yeah, and if you're having an issue, if you're having an issue figuring out your problem statement, I would actually maybe frame the question as, why are you doing this social enterprise? What I'm hoping is that I'm not going to see somebody write on there, I want to become a millionaire, right? Like, yes, you want to, actually make an income, but there's a reason why you've chosen to do social enterprise rather than just going into business, right? Like, there's a reason. Okay. I may have to ask, normalize deaf literacy. I would love to know, and this is why I have you do this, so I can get kind of ideas of what you're doing.
Yeah, that was mine. Hello, my name is Maria.
Hi, Maria.
Normalizing deaf literacy in the context of, there's a few things, but I can summarize it by saying adjusting our policies when it comes to, for example, bereavement leave, and also hosting workshops and sessions in workplaces to make that conversation had. And so people just become not necessarily even deaf literate, but also just emotionally compassionate and increase their emotional intelligence.
And can you just, can I just ask, Maria, and I apologize for my ignorance on this matter, but is deaf literacy, is that an actual term used in that?
Yeah.
Area? Okay.
Yeah,
excellent.
it is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great.
I just did it now.
Yeah, excellent. Good. Excellent. Okay, so we'll give it a couple more minutes, and then this will just give me sort of an idea as I go through, because I may even use specific examples. That's why I asked you to do this. Reduce school exclusions, that's great. Increase equity and access to social entrepreneurship support, that's fantastic. So these are all really great problem statements. Any more before we move on? Oh, that's great. I'd love to hear about that one too. That's great. And the reason I actually, another reason I asked you to do the problem statement is, we're going to be talking about outcomes tonight, right? Short term, medium term, and long term. And in general, what I find is that with your projects or programs or products, with whatever you're evaluating, Many of you may have short-term outcomes to start, right? But really at the end of the day, your goal are those really meaty long-term outcomes. And those don't generally happen right away with program evaluation, right? Those are things that generally will happen in some programs 5 years out. It can take to actually realize a long-term outcome, right? And what I'm seeing in some of your problem statements are there are some long-term outcomes, but you also probably have some shorter outcomes that you want to accomplish in the meantime. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about outcomes. Oh, excellent. Remove barriers. Okay, this is great. Is there anybody else that's writing before I move on? Just so I know. Any idea, Cole? Should I give it a second?
I think we're good to go. And then any more that we can add, and we can even, when we're sending out the post-event stuff, we can adjust.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen back. Oh, I think you need to give me permission. Okay.
You should be able to share your screen.
Yep. Yep. No, I got it now. Yep. There we go. Okay. So before we get into the other kinds of program evaluation, we're just going to do a little bit of a review of what we talked about last week. So the first exercise, and for the people that were here last week, just forgive me, I'm going to just give the people who weren't able to attend the first session just a little bit of guidance on the workbook. So what you'll see is that I've created a 13-page workbook. And the whole idea is it's divided into 5 different parts where you can go through, complete a part, and that whatever part you've completed will feed into a logic model at the end. So rather than just give you a 1-page logic model to complete, I'm giving you the steps that you need to do to complete that logic model. So part of it is completing different exercises. The first one we looked at was the Evaluability Assessment, which is a type of program evaluation that looks at, is your actual social enterprise ready to be evaluated, right? Is it even possible, okay? So sometimes when you look at your, a program within either a social enterprise or an NGO, you have to look at a couple of key points. And the first one is if you have stakeholders, do they agree with the goals of your social enterprise? Okay, if in general, whoever your stakeholders are, we identified those last week. Do they agree with what you're doing? Do you have the sufficient resources to conduct a program evaluation? So resources, you need time, you need effort, you need money, you need buy-in, okay? So that's a question I've asked you to think about. And a really important key point is there anyone who would be interested in the findings of your evaluation? So if you have a social enterprise and you decide to evaluate it, who would be interested in that? I imagine for many of you, it would be government organizations, educational organizations, right? Who are your stakeholders? Who's interested? Is there an opportunity to change something in your program, or in your social enterprise? So that's another thing that program evaluation does. You might think that you've got a perfect social enterprise, everything's running great. You do this evaluation, and lo and behold, you find out something negative. Okay. So what do you do with that information? Do you just kind of forget about it and not address it? Or do you take that information and learn from it and improve your social enterprise? Right? It's the latter, right?
Elizabeth pondered in the chat, couldn't the findings influence your value proposition and influence the business case for adoption?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And that's a great question. So, but if you think about it, when you have to think about the actual temporal part of your evaluation, when are you doing the evaluation? For most of you, you're doing you're going to sort of engage in an evaluability assessment to see if you're ready for it, right? But if you actually have a program evaluation plan in place to add into your business case, that is going to strengthen. It's going to strengthen your case. So yeah, that's a really good question. The most important part of the evaluability assessment is, can you get the right information? Are you able to get, like, how, so if you have a social enterprise that you're just starting, right, just trying to get it off the ground, but you haven't actually engaged with your population, how are you going to get the right information, right? So you need to be able to figure out, do I have the ability to get the right information, right? So how many of you feel at this point that you have thought about your state, and I'm going to ask this as a 3 or 4 part question, that you've thought about your stakeholders, you have the resources available to do the evaluation, you definitely would have people interested or organizations interested in your findings, and can you get the right information? So yeah, a 1 if you say yes, a 2 if you say no, and a 3 if you just don't know at this point, and that a 3 is okay. So I'll give you a second to answer that question. And it also might be indicative of how far you get into the workbook too, if you don't have all the right information. Okay? And that's okay. But the important thing is that you're not coming out of this workshop with an actual program evaluation. You're not going to start it this week, but you come out with a plan. And so if anything, this workshop will also help you identify the gaps that you need to conduct a program evaluation, if that makes sense.
We have 1, 1, 1, 2, and mostly 3s otherwise.
Right, and
so
that's okay. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Because if you think of it this way, and this is kind of why I asked that question, if we had 20 people in this workshop and everybody said 1, you probably wouldn't be in this workshop. You'd probably be in a different workshop that's more advanced, right? So this is just introducing you to the idea of program evaluation. Okay, so that, because I'm just in the interest of time, because I want to get to the impact outcome part, that is what we talk about when we talk about evaluability assessment. And for those of you who haven't had a chance, you can, and you don't have to do it tonight, but you can go to part 1 of the workbook and you can see the kinds of questions that are asked to complete an evaluability assessment. Okay. Just move forward. So your focus is going to be, what will you evaluate? Okay. Can you get the information? So again, look at your social enterprise. If your social enterprise, and let me just ask, how many of your social enterprises involves creating something, a product? So it could be a program, like a computer program, educational materials. How many of you have are developing a product? A 1 if yes, 2 if no. I'm just curious.
it's looking like a lot of 1s.
Okay, so a lot of products. So so if you're evaluating a product, how many, okay, so lots of yeses. How many of you have that product completely, it's created, it's past the initial phases, you're ready to introduce that to your audience? 1 if yes, 2 if almost, and 3 if no.
It looks like we have some MVPs, but it's pretty dispersed across the board.
Okay. So what that tells me is some of you at this point may not be able to get the right information, because you won't be able to evaluate that product if your product if it's not ready yet, right? How are you going to evaluate the impact? And that's okay. This is the perfect session for you, because it's going to get you thinking about that. And it's like someone asked earlier, it's going to help strengthen your business case. If you say, here's what I'm going to do, here's how I'm going to evaluate the impact of that product. If you have those actual things in place when you apply for funding, it's super important. Having been on the other end, having been an evaluator of government grants, I can tell you that having a program evaluation plan in place will only strengthen your applications. Okay, so that's just something to think about. And then within the evaluability assessment, finally, who are your stakeholders? Okay, these are the folks that are going to care about what you're doing. I'm going to pick on Elizabeth again. Sorry, Elizabeth. Can you tell me who your stakeholders are? Because you did this last week, so it's an easy question, just to give people an idea who weren't here what the idea of a stakeholder is.
Going back to that lack of brain pan.
You're fine. You know what you're doing.
Sort of. Oh, cannot start video. Oh, something's going on. So stakeholders. So we are looking at the autism service providers, the autism employment specialists, as well as the autism community,
Yeah.
parents, caregivers, even educational facilities, career centers.
I would also argue, and I think Elizabeth, you've got like a great like hold on who your stakeholders are, but I would actually say the community, right?
Oh, I did say that.
How do you feel when you go, like, I know when I go somewhere, like, so for example, how do people feel when they go into like a store and you see somebody, you meet somebody in a store working there and you get to know them? And this has happened to me several times where I've met people who have autism or who have, something that they're dealing with in life, however you want to, some people would not characterize it as a disability, right? But how does the community feel when people are, immersed and working and happy and healthy, right? Like, what's the impact on the community? And that could be a long-term consideration for you, Elizabeth, is that there's an impact on the community. So they're kind of stakeholders as well.
That depends, because there's a lot of challenges actually around getting community acceptance, believe it or not. So
really? That's interesting to me.
Yeah, there's not as much of a feel-good situation as you're thinking. So, I mean, it's good in theory, but there's so many myths and misconceptions around autism and what that means and how people on the spectrum present and what have you, that, our goal is to have people having autism working and nobody's the wiser that they even have a challenge.
Oh, that's a really good point. But when you think about it, right, like, you have a lot of different stakeholders to please or to meet that challenge. But if that's your goal, to have people working in the community, and I only tell you from experience, because I've worked in organizations where we've had people with autism working in those organizations. And I can tell you the experience of working with those people was, I mean, for me and the people I worked with, incredible, right? Just
absolutely. I'm not saying that it would be a bad experience. I'm just suggesting that we have far more to go around education on not only the business case, but the community case for working with the autism community than we do acceptance.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
and so that might be something that's within your evaluation as well. That could be a component. So that's good. Sorry to pick on you, but I do find what you're doing really interesting, and that's kind of why I'll try not to the rest of you tonight. So
honestly, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I am distracted today, but always happy to answer questions. It's all good.
So, okay, so getting back, and again, so think about who your stakeholders are, who is going to care about what you're doing. Okay. And sometimes there's people who will care that you wouldn't even have identified, right? So that's an important part of it. In the workbook, there's an area where you can do that, and that's going to feed into your evaluation. Okay. So I'm just going to move, in the interest of time, I'm just going to keep moving here. Oops, sorry. So the next is a needs assessment. Okay. So this is usually done to determine the type of product or program or project that's required. Okay, so what are the needs of your clients and what are the gaps in the service? So for example, this might be done when your social enterprise is kind of up and running, right? You may look at your social enterprise with a critical lens, like what's missing? What are the things we need to change? And that's always a good thing. That is not a negative thing to look at what you're doing with that type of critical lens. Okay, so but the main question is there something that I can change in what I'm offering, right? So many of you that said that you're creating products, is there room within your social enterprise to change those products if something's not working? Can I just throw that out to anybody who wants to share? So if there's anybody that I don't know if they're doing it in the chat box. I can't see. Sorry.
I just got a one.
My name is Lee, and I have Social Robots. It's my business, and we initially started with focusing on using robots to help families stay connected with their loved ones in retirement homes. But with COVID, the model changed a bit, and now it's really saying, what else can people do with robots? So instead of the robot coming to visit, once a week, now the robot has to be at the retirement home and stay there permanently. And now we're trying to make a business case for, well, could you listen to music? Can you read audiobooks? Can you play games? Like, what do people want to do with the robot? So
the needs assessment would really apply to what you're doing.
Yeah.
But how long have you, so your social enterprise has started, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what sort of, I guess if you could say phase or year, what year are you in? How far along are you?
It's been about 2 years.
Okay.
We're in pilot tests right now, so validation stage.
Okay.
And I have 2 pilot tests going, and that's through funding through the Community Foundation of Oakville, the Community Foundation IRP program.
Okay, good. So this is really interesting, Lee, because when I'm hearing you talk, I think you're like the outcome impact part of this is going to really apply to you.
Definitely.
I mean, because you've been going for 2 years, I think, but the challenge for you is going to be, how do you actually evaluate that, right? Because with your population, I imagine they're quite vulnerable in some cases. So
Yes.
You may not, I'm assuming people who would engage in this social enterprise would maybe be people who aren't, computer literate, maybe can't write, like depending on,
Yes, they're being assisted by the recreation director at the retirement home. So they we printed out questionnaires for them to fill in.
Oh, you have?
I actually had some help from Professor Hayden at the Elder Research Center at Sheridan. And
so great. That's amazing.
Yeah, so we did 3 different assessment questionnaires. So UCLA loneliness scale, short form quality of life, and geriatric depression scale. So it's been really exciting. But the residents need to be supported. They're helped by the recreation assistant. Like they're not really filling them out on their own.
So I'm like thinking about what you're doing. Obviously I'm going to move on, but I just want to say you may want to add a qualitative component into your evaluation. Like I see that as being very useful for you.
Thank you.
And we'll talk about those methods later, but that might be something that you actually think about, because that's so interesting to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Okay, so both of those components, so an evaluability and assessment and needs assessment, when you complete those in the workbook, they help you fill out part of the actual logic model. So, and I'm just going to go through this quickly because this is basically what the workbook is for. Your end goal is to be able to have either you can use this form of logic model, which is really broad, or you can see, I think it's worksheet C I gave you, which is kind of a more detailed type of logic model. So you want to figure out what your problem statement is. What is your goal? So what is the intended aim or impact over the life of your social enterprise? Why will the activities within your social enterprise produce the results that you want? Okay, what are your assumptions? So what factors are necessary for your program to succeed? What are your resources? And so that's the people, time, money. We're going to talk about that tonight that go into your program. The activities. So what are the program actions? What are the social enterprise actions? And how are you going to achieve your results? The outputs. This is the tangible direct products that are created from your program activities, right? So Lee, you have a robot, but within that, the robot is your product, but the activity is immersing your product within the lives of your target audience. That's your activity, right? Okay. So you're going to think about how can I evaluate that? Right. And then the most interesting part is the outcome. Okay, so this is what we're going to really focus on tonight, the outcome of your social enterprises. And we'll get into that in a second. And then last week, we also reviewed the idea at the very bottom there, external influences. So these are things that are beyond your control, right? So these are things that will affect your social enterprise. And it's just things you can't control. So for example, if you are delivering a program where the community just doesn't like what you're doing and doesn't accept it, you can't control that. If the government isn't interested in what you do, you can't control that, right? It's just, it is what it is, okay? So that's what we mean by external influences. So, so that was just a quick review on 1 and 2, evaluability assessments and needs assessment. And those are the first 2 types of a program evaluation. And now we're going to focus on efficiency and impact outcome evaluation. So the other 3, implementation and process evaluation, monitoring and review of compliance with standards, and program review, those we will touch on. Those are not really applicable to social enterprise. Those are more for long-standing, really large programs that have a lot of activities involved. Okay, so I just put them there so you know that these types of program evaluations exist, but you don't need to worry about them. Okay, so before we move into talking about efficiency assessments and impact outcome evaluation, does anybody have any questions? If there's something you're wondering, there's nothing off limits. Most people will probably have the same question. Is there any questions before we move on? That was just sort of a quick review. Any questions?
Doesn't look like anything's popping up in the chat. I think we're good to go.
Okay. So efficiency assessment. Okay, so this is the type of evaluation usually undertaken when a program or social enterprise has been operating for a little bit of time, right? So I think, Lee, this would probably apply to what you're doing because you've been up and running for 2 years. And so we're looking at the types of things that go into a social enterprise, into the product, program, or any of the activities involved, okay? So we're looking at your expenditures and your costs. So what are the time and effort that goes into your program? Is it sustainable? In government, we have this saying, and I'm sure you've heard it, value for money, right? So you're all doing something great for society, but you also want to make a living from what you're doing, right? So are you getting value for money? And can you estimate the monetary relationship between the relative value of your specific program or product or project, okay? Sometimes at this point too, and again, I'm going to pick on Lee again. Elizabeth will be happy. Are there other programs in place that do this, Lee, or do something similar?
Certainly since COVID, people have been using tablets just to do like games and video calls and smartphones as well.
Yeah, so you may want to connect with those other programs to see what they're doing, network. The other thing is you can do a jurisdictional research, right? My guess would be, and actually I did actually see, you may be interested in this, Lee, and I can't remember the name of the actual documentary right now, but there was a documentary where they actually put robots in people's houses, and this was in China, and for the elderly. And but instead of them being in a home, it actually went instead of them being in care homes, they actually put the robot in the actual like apartment or house wherever the senior was living, and it was all about how the senior interacted with this. It was actually a big robot that it was like a full-size robot that talked to them and actually did some chores.
Oh, wow.
But it was very interesting. So you may want to kind of like spread your wings and kind of look at all the different research that exists out there to support what you're actually doing, right? Yeah, so had you heard about that, Lee?
I have not heard of that documentary. I'll have to look it up. Thank you.
So where you would find it would be not last year, not last May 2020. It would have been May 2019 at Hot Docs. I saw it. And so it would probably be on their list of films. I can try and find it and provide that to the information to Cole, but that might be something that you check out.
Thank you.
So again, and that talks about the programs and services being compared. So you want to just kind of look at what's out there, and just because you have a program that's similar to yours, it doesn't mean they're competition what it actually means is that it's strengthening the perception of the need for your program, right? Because just because one program is out there that's similar, you can't say, oh, I'm doing the same thing. Well, that means you're on to something, right? So I thought of that film, Lee, because as soon as you said what you were doing, I was like, yeah, I've seen this done before, right? And so that is actually sort of an ethnography. It was a documentary, but it's an ethnography because the filmmaker went into the home and observed the changes in this elderly person after the robot, and the robot had a name. The robot had actually a personality. And what happened with that robot was it developed a personality once it interacted with the people in the home.
Wow.
Right. So if people are funny, it would start to tell jokes, right? Like things like that. So you might find that interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So this is in the workbook, you'll find this particular chart. So this is what we talk about when we talk about efficiency. So can you talk about the funds for your social enterprise, both the startup and how the funds you have to sustain it? Do you have staff and volunteers that help you? The time and effort that goes into it. And sometimes this part takes a lot longer than what you think, because my guess is that a lot of you are putting in like your heart and soul into these social enterprises. So the time and effort that you put in would be sort of immeasurable in the beginning, and that's okay. And the material, what kinds of material? Like, for example, Lee, you have these robots, so you had to actually purchase them or have them. I don't know if you had them made, if they existed already. I'm not sure what you did to do that, but these are what you have to think about when we talk about efficiency. Okay, so these are your resources. So how many of you think that you could adequately identify the resources that are going into your social enterprises? 1, yes. 2, no. And 3, I'm just not sure.
We're looking at mostly ones.
Okay, good. That's good. That's a really good sign. So that's a good start. And for those of you who maybe can't, that's okay too, because this exercise tonight will get you to start thinking about it. Okay. When you go to apply for grants, you have to know this stuff, right? You got to know what's going into your social enterprise. You have to have a really good handle on what your resources are, okay, to make your case. Lee, did you have a question? I saw your hand go up before I move on. Do you have a question?
No, I think somebody else had put their hand up, but I was just raising my hand to say, yes, I do know my resources.
Oh, okay, got it. Does anyone have a question before we move on? Anyone? Okay.
Looks like we're good.
So now this is my favorite part of the evaluation. Okay, this is the fun part. This is why you all came here. This is what we want to know. Is your social enterprise having the impact or outcome that you anticipated? Okay. So you're really looking at the extent to, if you have a particular problem statement that you've articulated, is your social enterprise solving that problem? Right. This is what we talk about when we talk about measuring outcomes. The outcome is you solving that problem. Okay. So really you're trying to assess the impact of your program. So how many of you think that you have an idea of what the impact of your social enterprise will be? So 1 if yes, 2 no.
Just waiting for some more answers to come in, but so far it's mostly ones again.
Excellent. So now here's my next question. So you have an idea of what the impact of, or your stated impact would be of your program. How many of you have an idea or have thought about the unintended program impacts that your social enterprise might have? So Lee, I'll pick on you. You have designed this product. So what is the outcome? What is your main outcome that you're looking at with this product?
To reduce social isolation, loneliness, and boredom among older adults in congregate living facilities.
Excellent. So might there be any unintended program impacts? I can think of one, and I'll tell you what I'm thinking in a second, but I'm
Okay.
just wondering if you thought about that.
Well, the one that I'm working on right now is to see if the impact on staff at these facilities and volunteers. So,
Oh, excellent. I hadn't thought of that, but that's
yeah.
excellent.
yeah. So,
But I was thinking about families. What about
Okay,
the
yeah.
impact on the families of these the people that are provided with this service?
Yeah, so we're actually assessing we're getting them involved in the sharing of content on the like through a private family portal. And I got an email from one of the stepdaughters today, and she just said it's a brilliant solution. She's so happy. So it's really
when you
exciting.
go to apply for funding,
Yeah.
you need to start to collect that qualitative data.
Oh,
any
okay, great.
emails or any messages you get, that's qualitative data.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, thank you.
And so you may even want to think about surveying the families of who have loved ones that are involved in this program.
Okay.
Okay, so that's another way you can evaluate the impact of your program. And let me tell you, real stories. And so all of you should be thinking about collecting, like we always talk about quantitative data. Qualitative is really important, folks, when you're evaluating a social enterprise. And I think I told this story, I think I told it last week, but I'll tell it again for those of you who weren't here. And I talk about how when I did the survey for the sexual assault centers for Ontario, I designed a pre and post survey. When I designed the survey, it was a quantitative survey with different types of scales. I had convinced my director to allow me to include a qualitative question on the survey, which isn't usually done. It's usually quantitative survey. But I said, you know what? We don't know if people are even going to respond. We have no idea what's going to happen. So this is a lot of time and effort that's gone into this evaluation. Let's include a qualitative question. And if at the very least, we don't get a lot of responses on the scales like pre and post that we can compare. So you can imagine people answering questions in the pre and maybe not answering them on the post, so you can't do the comparison. One of the things we did was we asked just a very simple question. Is there anything else you want to tell us about this program? That's it. And I can tell you, when I was presenting the data to the Attorney General and Assistant Deputy Attorney General, that was my audience, to whether or not these sexual assault programs have value for money. I can tell you that when I presented the qualitative data, were several, I think it was probably 10 or 11 people in the program, and that's just, those are just the people who answered that question, said verbatim, all said the same thing. If I didn't have this program or this counseling, I would be dead. How impactful do you think that is for people that are funding a program like that? Pretty impactful. So I guess what I'm saying to everybody, quantitative information, numbers, scales, survey questions are important, but don't forget about qualitative information. And so if you have emails or messages from clients or family members of clients, and Elizabeth, that would apply to you as well, supporting your program, and you can, you have to ask first. You can't just include people's comments unless it's a survey and they've agreed to take the survey. Ask them if you wouldn't mind, if they wouldn't mind if you included that in your analysis. Okay. So when we talk about impact outcome evaluation, we're starting to look at the causal relationships between what we're doing and the impact that we're having. So here's what part of the workbook, what you're going to be asked to do. You're going to be asked to talk about different activities. So for someone like Lee, you might talk about, first you have your activity was the creation of a robot, like a robot, then you would explain what that is. Then you would talk about how the robot's used. So it's used, clients, I'm assuming they can't keep the robot, so they're probably enrolled in a certain program that for a length of time where they have the robot, right? Then there might be actual engaged sessions or awareness sessions. There might even be an education session with the clients on how to use the robot. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but those are how your activities would look, okay? and then kind of explain what you're doing. And again, this will all feed into your logic model. Okay. So those are the activities of your social enterprise. Are there any questions so far before we move on? We're good. Okay. Again, products and services. What's going into your social enterprise? So this, there could be several different things. Some of you may have, awareness sessions that you create. Like, so for example, educational awareness. You may have different types of materials that go into your social enterprise. So this is when you would account for that. Okay. So these are your outputs. So I want to, before we get into doing the logic model, talk about your social impact goals. Okay, we've talked about a problem statement, right? Talked about outcomes. So social impact goals are a little different than your regular like programs that are out there, your regular social service programs. Okay, so social impact goals can be outcome oriented. So that's aligning what you say your mission is with actually like global goals, right? So for example, Elizabeth, what you're doing is not just it's benefiting the person, but it also has a benefit for the community as a whole, right? You're creating self-sufficiency. You're actually creating an increase in people with autism being involved in the employment sector, right? And that can only have a good impact, right?
One of the things that we did in the pitch today was mention that right now there's a massive dependency on government programs and a huge drain on parent savings.
Yep.
And parents now have to, depending on the needs level of their child, they have to start doing extra financial planning and set up funds for their kids to make sure that they're taken care of. So they're not only saving for their own retirement, they're saving for their kids' lifespan.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So that's so your social enterprise is going to have some outcome oriented goals that you're going to talk about.
Yes.
Indicator oriented goals are more monitoring social, financial, and operational impact. So this is when we talk about sustainability and can you're doing some good with your social enterprise, but is it going to have long-term effects, right? So that's what we talk about when we talk about indicator-oriented goals. These are more sort of specific goals, okay? And I'm just kind of differentiating this for you. You don't have to like memorize this. This is just to differentiate it. So when we talk about outcomes, we talk so in the program evaluation community, we have short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals, okay? So short-term goals are changes in awareness, skills, or knowledge. Okay? So medium-term goals are actual changes in behavior, participation, attitude, conditions. Long-term outcomes might be changes in social, economic, civic, and environmental conditions. So for someone like, and Lee, I'll just pick on you. I was going to use another example, but since you're here, I might as well use your example. So you might have some short-term goals, and that would be you have this product you're introducing, this robot, social robot. So the short-term goal might be to actually get people to engage. So so compliance, people to use them, right? That's a simple goal. So that might be something you measure, right? The number of a short-term outcome. So how you might look at that is the number of clients that were introduced to the robot and the number of clients that used it, that actually engaged with it. Okay, that's a short-term goal. That's the first step. Medium term would be for them to participate and use it long-term, right? So you introduce it, they keep it, but are they consistently using it? Okay.
Right.
Or in the beginning, do they look at it and go, oh, I'm not interested, but then you see a change that they're interested, right? So that's something you can measure.
Yeah.
Long term for you, Lee, I don't think it's going to happen right away, but you're going to look at the different long-term outcomes. So have you thought of your long-term outcomes with this? Like, what are you thinking about like 5 years down the road with the introduction of the social robots?
Well, it's interesting because somebody mentioned, Kuji mentioned that like robot repair shops and robot technicians. Like I actually think that 5 years from now, hopefully robots will be more understood and accepted like tablets are now. And so that there will be, tech support, all kinds of
I hadn't
different
even thought
jobs.
about that. I actually hadn't even thought about that.
And then also
Um,
app development would be the other thing. So it's like, these are commercially available robots. They're really designed for children. And I'm looking at creating an ecosystem where there would be more games that are designed and appropriate for adults and older.
Yeah, so there's your long-term goal. So that's it. So what I'm kind of going to ask you all to think about tonight, and again, if you're confused, that's okay, because when I teach this to my students, like I have, weeks upon end to teach them, to clarify. We don't have a lot of time, so I fully cognizant of the fact that I'm throwing these terms at you and they're very technical. So that, and that's okay if you don't understand. But that's why I tried to use a sort of an example, and I'm happy to, when we go into the breakout rooms, kind of help you finesse what you think your different goals are. And remember, they're subjective, right? Like you might tell, like for example, Lee, I hadn't even thought about that long-term outcome. I had not even thought about it. I was thinking more on like the families of whose loved ones are involved in this program, right? Like might they have better functionality? Might they have better life outcomes because they don't have to worry as much about their parents, right? Their parents are engaged, or their family members engaged in this social robot program, right? So I was thinking about that, but you mentioned something I hadn't even thought of. Also, what about staff retention, right? Like how great would it be to work at a place where you have something so engaging, right? Where it's not as depressing, it's actually happy, right? So that's something you could think about. So I'm happy to help you finesse your outcomes.
Thank you.
So before we get into talking about what we'll do, Cole, is when we go into the breakout room, then we'll give people like a break to to kind of use the bathroom and then come back or get a drink, and they can do that during the breakout room time. So we're almost at a break, everyone. So I put the next couple slides together because again, when I teach program evaluation, I do program evaluation for governments. Social enterprise, when I was asked to do this was sort of a whole new area for me. So I had to kind of learn a little bit too. So I want to talk about the different kinds of things you would look at within a social enterprise. So consider when you're going to evaluate your social enterprise. So the first thing is culture. Do you have acceptance and beliefs and values and practices in the social enterprise that are accepted? Like, is what you're doing going to be accepted? Okay. External relations. Does what you're doing, is it going to be positively received by the media, stakeholders, other community members like businesses? Okay. And does it have public visibility? Right? Is that something that your social enterprise has? Financial development. Okay. So, do you have, like, is it sustainable? Is what you're doing, does it have the capacity to be around 10 years from now, right? Like, what are you going to have to do within your social enterprise to ensure that it's sustainable? Okay, is there a long-term financial plan? Like, for example, Lee, with your robots, like 10 years from now, your robots are going to probably look a little bit different. They may have more AI infused in them, right? Like, I imagine they're very expensive. So they may not be 10 years from now, right? Things change, right?
Yeah.
Financial systems, do you have the resources in place to ensure that your social enterprise succeeds financially? Do you have those checks and balances in place? Do you have the appropriate skills and ideas to make a positive contribution, right? Do you have the skill set? And most of you have that skill set. So these are the kinds of things that you have to think about. Does your social enterprise, what you're doing, does it align with your articulated mission statement, problem statement, and goals? Okay. And innovation. So this is what's really interesting for when I talk to people about social enterprise. The question is, has your social enterprise demonstrated innovation and adaptability, right? So most of what you're doing, whenever I ask you about your problem statements, I have never heard of what you're doing most of the time, with the exception of Lee. I saw that documentary about the robot interaction, but most of you have like really, and yours is as well, Lee, really innovative approaches. But can they adapt? Can you make changes to them to improve? Is society benefiting from your program and services or your products, right? Organizational structures. Does the structure of what you have in place right now support the innovation? And do you have a proper structure of governance? Can you track what you're doing, right? Like you want to make sure that all your finances, everything is being, implemented in a way that follows the appropriate structures of governance, okay? So organizational skills. So do you have business planning in place, right? So that would be, are you writing many of you are writing business cases. Do you have the capacity to do that? And can you write a strong business case? And then does your social enterprise have a clear strategic direction? So that might mean, like, for example, you introduce something, but do you have strategic direction of where you want to be 5 years from now? So those are individual social enterprise considerations or questions when we talk about evaluation, okay? So now we're going to move into the breakout rooms. So it's 7:06, so this is good time. We made a little bit of time up. So I've said about 20 minutes, but I'd say about 20, and then I can kind of wrap it up with the finishing questions. So this is where you would go into your workbook and just try to the best of your ability to complete 4 and 5 in the program evaluation parts. I've introduced those to you now, so you can just kind of read those over and do your best to fill those out. And for those of you who weren't here last week, not a problem. Just try and do parts 4 and 5, and then when the session's over tonight, you may have to go back and do parts 1 and 2. So what you'll see is that there is a worksheet C that I've included, that I've created for you, that will help you do part of this workbook. And you'll see where it's referenced in the workbook, okay? Are there any questions before we go off into the breakout rooms? Why don't we take, Cole, like 2 minutes for everybody to have an actual break, 2 to 3 minutes, and then go into the breakout rooms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it'd be most appropriate. How about this? We'll move into the breakout rooms at 7:10, and then we'll come back at 7:25.
Perfect.
Does that seem fair?
Yeah.
So I will open up the rooms in about 3 minutes. So
Perfect.
feel free to pop away, and then when you guys come back, or if you need to come back after, let's say, a washroom break or something of that nature, we'll have the opportunity to move into rooms.
Perfect. Okay, and I'm just going to pop out and grab some more water, and then I'll be back if anybody has any questions. I'll be back in a minute.
You're also muted. I muted you just in case.
Mute myself. These sessions go by so fast, Cole. It's funny. I always think when I first started doing these, like, we're going to be able to fill the time, but it goes by so quickly.
It's actually quite interesting. I think as we keep making our way through the virtual space and dealing with the kind of changes that we have to deal with, especially when it first started, a session that was 2.5 hours was always just, it would drone on and felt like an entire day. But even at an hour and a half, this session whizzes by. So quite interesting in how that works. We had a couple people drop off. I think that's because, you know, a little bit of breakout room anxiety and a little bit of, you know, it's coming on to about 7:10. So I'm gonna open up the rooms. We have it slated for enough to have at least 2 people in each of the rooms, and work with at least one of the facilitators or the support staff. Or what I can do is we can also just stay as a collective if you'd like, and speak and work through this, as we only have, I believe, 6 participants.
Let's
I'll leave
stay
it up
as
to
a
you.
collective. Let's stay as a collective. Does that work for everybody? So then as people ask if people ask questions, then generally other people will have the same question most of the time. So let's do that.
I think we'll stay as a collective, just because we've got now a more tight-knit group. And Nirpan, he's with it. I like that. So we'll stick with each other for that one, or for this, and keep going. I think just for everybody, we'll since we're not going to break out into rooms, let's give it maybe 1 more minute, and then if people are back, just quickly type in the chat, say that you're back, so I can kind of get a pulse check for everybody who's joined. So please just type 1 when you are. Thank you, Maripon. I appreciate it. Hey, Michelle, glad to see you again. This is your
See you.
second session with us, right?
Yes, it is.
Excited to have you. I was when we were running through and starting off the sessions, then I saw the profile picture from your Zoom, so I was very happy that you decided to join us for another session.
Thank
And
you.
hopefully many more to come.
I
Hopefully
hope
many
so
more.
too. I hope so too.
Awesome. Awesome. So we got 3 people back for sure. I know both Jess and Sam are there. Maybe we'll leave maybe a minute or 2 for Lee, Rachel, and Breshna.
And I'm wondering, Cole, if it might be helpful if just a couple minutes, if I pull up the workbook on the screen and kind of just
Please.
So can I just, for everybody that's on here, there's a few people that weren't here last week. So would that be helpful if I just kind of go through it from sort of front to start quickly to show you how it sort of, you know, my idea of how it feeds into the final product? Would that be helpful for
By
everybody?
all means, I think that would be perfect.
Okay. So I'll just wait till there's a couple people back, and then I'll pull it up on the screen and go through it.
Mm-hmm. Just so you know, I pulled down your screen share earlier, so you'll have to share your screen again.
Sure. Just let me know when you want me to start that, Cole, because I know there's a few people away. So
I think most of the people are back. We might just be waiting on Lee and Breshna, if anything.
okay, I'll just start that now then, because I pulled up the workbook. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to go through this, and for the people that weren't here last week. So part 1, and so the whole idea is for you to just look at the question. And so this is where you would state your problem statement and goals. And then for these particular areas, if you look, and I'll just show you quickly, whatever you answer here, and it can be in point form. So the question is, using point form, clearly describe your program, project, or endeavor that you want to solve. So there's a worksheet that I've included to help you fill out these sections. So the idea would be you'd go to worksheet A, take some time to do it, and it would help inform the answers to these questions. Once you complete question 1 and question 2, question 1 in part 1 and question 2 in part 1, and then the next part 2 here, which is the evaluability, the information that you put into these text boxes here, you'd go to page 11, you'd flip over to page 11, and you can do it right away or you can do it later, but you can fill out the information, in page 11, so you can actually, from your point form, write a problem statement, write a program goal, talk about your resources, talk about the rationale for your social enterprise, and then talk about the assumptions behind what you're doing. So one assumption might be that actually people would attend your or engage in your program, or like, for example, for you, Lee, that people would actually have access to these robots, the staff would be willing to do it, whoever your support workers are. So that's from last week. Once you fill out part 2, okay, so part 2 is question 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's when you talk about your resources, the stakeholders involved. So these should be fairly straightforward for you. And then who would mostly be interested in your findings. Part 3 is your needs assessment. So that's what we're going to start to talk about. Like, is there an opportunity to change something in your program, project, or product? Okay, so is there something that you might need to change? What are the specific needs of your existing clients? And this is Lee, I talked to you about this. Are there any other programs or projects that already, do any other programs exist that could serve your existing clients? Okay. And so you may say, yes, they exist, but not in this jurisdiction or not in this country. So that is, it kind of gives whoever your funders are, proves the demonstrated need for your social enterprise. Then we reviewed this tonight, your expenditures. Oh, sorry, am I going, is this coming up? Can you guys see me moving the screen here?
Yes, we can see everything.
Okay, it just looked different for me. So then you go through your funds, your staff, your time and effort to the best of your ability to answer this, okay? And this again would go in on page 11 in your resources and input section, okay? So the activities here, this is again, you do your best to complete your activities. Some of you may only have 1 or 2, right? But this information would go in on page 12, okay? So if we flip to page 12, we have activities, output, short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes, okay? And then again, here's your outcome section. So this is when you start to think about the outcomes that you hope your social enterprise will produce, okay? You can do this in point form. And then once you have this information, you enter it in page 12, okay? So then now when you have all this information, the information, so if you go to worksheet C, which I will try to pull up momentarily. Do I have worksheet C here? Hold on a sec. I don't think I pulled it up. But worksheet C basically gives you sort of a model of how to actually complete this type of logic model. It gives you the actual information that would go in all of these sections. And then the final product is, this is kind of your succinct final product. So the idea of this workbook is you kind of start at the beginning, fill it out as you go, and then that will help you produce that particular product that you're looking to produce. Whoops. I'm going to just try to, well, how do I go back? I'm going to just share that particular, hold on one second. I'm just going to share activity.
Do you want me to share worksheet C for you?
Yeah, C, if you can do that, that would be great. If you could pull that up for me.
Yeah, give me a moment and I'm going to share my screen. Screen 2. Let's go. Can everybody see that?
Okay. Perfect.
Yes.
So this is, yeah, that's the activity right there. This is sort of, this could also be something that you actually submit with a grant application, right? This is what your logic model would look like, or you can do the more succinct one, either or. So the idea is this is your final product, and you can choose, like maybe you want a more detailed one like this, or maybe you want to have just the diagram one that I gave you. It's completely up to you. Some people like more of a visual. And so this is, so if you go back to the first page, Cole. So the first one there is, if you notice, what does the social enterprise hope to accomplish? That's your first objective. And then, so the idea is I've only given you 3, but if you have more, you can certainly add, you know, you can just sort of save this and copy more. So the idea is you go through each question. So you look at your inputs, activities, outputs, your outcomes, and then your indicators are what you would, how you're going to measure this. And we'll talk about this when we talk about the methods. Okay, so you don't have to so much worry about your indicators right now, because we're going to talk about the client surveys and the different methods after. Okay, is that clear to everybody? I've tried to make it as sort of straightforward and activities that you can build on to sort of learn as you go. Any questions at all?
One question I have is that, so do we fill in this logic model worksheet for like multiple objectives? So each one gets its own piece of paper? Is that how I interpret that? Like when it just says number 1 and then number 2, is that so for each objective, then you go through what are your inputs?
Yeah, that would be if you have like really succinct, high level objectives. Some of you may just want to do it for like your main objective, like, right, there might, but the reason I have more than one is that because some of you may have more than one, but my expectation for most of you is that you'll just have that high level main objective, right? And the objective is directly addressing your problem statement. So you have your problem statement, and the objective of my social enterprise is to address that problem statement by doing what? So what does your social enterprise hope to accomplish? Right. So I know there's a lot of things that you want to do, Lee, but what is the main thing you want to do?
Oh, you're asking me specifically right now?
Well, I'm just saying for you, that's what I would list as number 1.
Okay.
Right. And then unintended things that happen would be maybe number 2. Okay. And like I said, you're a little bit more, I think, advanced because yours has been running for a few years. So then that's why I put the extra ones in there. But for most of you, you're just going to be looking at 1.
Okay.
Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? So I would say for the next, like, just looking at the time here.
Be cognizant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say we've got about 9 minutes left.
Yeah. So why don't you take a few minutes? I like to look through the workbook because we don't have a lot of time to work on it. I think maybe the approach might be for you to look through it, get a grasp on what you're going to answer, or make sure you understand it. And then this might be just sort of like your homework, your takeaway that you do to help you, create a logic model. I think that Cole has, if you haven't shared my contact at, well, it's easy to find at Sheridan. I'm happy to answer questions outside of today's session. Like if you're like, I'm on page whatever and I don't understand this, I'm happy to, answer any questions you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for everybody who's attended this session and has effectively registered through the Eventbrite, we will be sending out some information, the session recording from last time and this time, a couple of things like our feedback form, again, all the resources once more, and then Marlene's preferred contact so that you can contact. We just ask that you be cognizant that she is working full-time at Sheridan, so that's, not to abuse the time that she's providing for everybody. Okay.
And the other thing I want to mention is that, interestingly enough, I didn't even think about this before, but in our Bachelor of Community Safety degree, we have students that will be looking for like internships with different organizations and companies that actually part of their main project is to do a program evaluation. So for any of you interested in sort of what they do, and you would like a student to help you, that you don't have to actually pay, that can do a program or help you do a program evaluation proposal, that might be something that you look at to, if you think that would be a fit. And some of your organizations, it will be a fit, and some of it, it may not, but that might be something you think about, looking at getting a Sheridan student to help you with your program evaluation.
Awesome. Do you think maybe now would be a good time, maybe we wrap up for the evening, or?
Sure, if people have questions. Again, mainly I would like people to walk away tonight having an understanding of basically how to complete the workbook. And it doesn't have to be tonight, but this should be something that for those of you who are thinking of applying for funding, that this workbook will help you create that sort of program evaluation plan, to have that logic model in place for when you go to actually apply or create a business case. So if you have questions, this is a great time to ask them. And I know it's a lot of information, so.
In regards to student support, Marlene, does it have to be like a specific size? Like for me, it would be a startup. Would that impact? Because you're talking a placement, because usually I know that's for established organizations.
It really depends. I can get back to you on that. That I'm not 100% sure. I just know that they need to collect data for their projects. Whether it needs to be a really established, I mean, I wouldn't see why, because they're doing a project. It wouldn't, to me, it wouldn't matter. I mean, like, gone are the days of brick and mortar, right? Like, the reality of it is our students who do these may not even be able to go into into a brick and mortar organization in the fall, right? So I'm gonna just I'm gonna pose that question
Okay.
to our program coordinator. But you could also too, like, the other thing is you could also link to link to the resources at Sheridan to find out as well. So there's an actual co-op office, right?
Okay.
That places these students. But what does can you just remind me, what does your social enterprise do?
Well, I'm just about a startup, so I'm in the initial stages, but it has to do with relationships, with family relationships and user and communication.
Oh,
Structured communication as a way to support / maintain family relationships.
Would there be a psychology component to that? Like, in that, if you wanted to evaluate what you're doing, would there be like room to evaluate it doing like a survey or qualitative interviews? Like, would there be opportunity for that?
Yes, and
Okay,
that's
so-
me just putting it together. But
Okay.
based on my prior knowledge or based on what's in my head at this point, yes.
So now, are you looking for an evaluation? Like, you haven't actually delivered this yet, that you're looking
No,
for?
that's why I'm asking.
Okay, so you're more looking for like a quality assurance to see if everything is in place for, like, to be able to be evaluated, like, to actually all the products and services that you
Right.
have. Okay. I can for sure ask. And Cole, what I will do after I talk to our program coordinator, I can link back with you and let you know if this is something that might work with our students. Because, hey, I mean, it's,
I actually wanted to mention, because we're actually at Edge right now, we're already doing something similar with the Pelon School of Business for their integrated industry projects and their capstones.
oh yeah.
So I see this as like a beautiful way to integrate different different programs from different faculties and see how we can integrate more businesses. So I will give you Besma's information, because she leads and she works with the co-op office already for a lot of those different pieces. So I think that could be very useful.
Yeah, because our students, like what I'm teaching, like kind of going through with you, they have a whole course in it, and they have their professors. So you would have a connection to the student.
Actually, one of the participants today is already participating in something similar to that. So I can attest that we are working on getting that. And it's also a course directly integrated into the Bachelor of Business Administration program as well.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think that would be would work really well. The other thing that our students can do, for those of you who say aren't, like, you've got your concept, you've got your idea, you haven't, like, you're not as far as advanced, but you need to make a business case, is they could do like a research project for you that actually demonstrates the need for what you're doing. That's another thing that could happen if it's not program evaluation. There's other things that they could do. So
yeah, I think I might be a better fit there.
Yeah, that might work. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
Depending on what stage of that you're at, Lee, you're at a stage where I think you could. I mean, you could if you wanted the help, a student could help you, because you're 2 years in, like that. I could see that being useful.
Yeah, I actually have a social work gerontology student working for me. I hired her through the grant to do as a research associate.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
That's great. That's awesome.
So I think we're.
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, even if you don't think, like, when we talk about community safety, some of you might be thinking, oh, well, my project doesn't relate to policing. That's not when we talk about community safety, that's not what the degree is about. It's an interdisciplinary degree. And there are different aspects to community safety that we look at, like applying the public health model to addressing crime, right? But there are different aspects, and part of it is prevention and resiliency, making the population resilient, right? So there are different aspects that could fit in with your actual social enterprise. It's not just about crime, right? Community safety has many different aspects to it. Sorry, Cole, go ahead.
I was just going to say I wanted to be cognizant of the time because it's right about 7:30. And I think it'd probably be appropriate to maybe wrap up unless anybody had any other specific questions for Marlene. I will take silence as affirmation. As we're ending for the evening, I just wanted to shoot a big thank you again to Marlene Santin for joining us and facilitating the session this evening. I've posted a couple links in the chat, one for a feedback form. We'd love to get your feedback on the session, and we'd love to see how we can keep making these sessions better and better for you as we move forward. It takes about 2 minutes, so please just fill that form out as we'd be eternally grateful. Additionally, I put a link to our programs page. If you are not already an Edge Venture, please feel free to check out the different programs that we have available. All programs that we offer are free and open to the public, not exclusive to Sheridan College. So feel free to check those out. There's many benefits, as some of the Edge members in the call can attest to. Additionally, I've posted our Eventbrite link if you want to check out the rest of the workshops that we have going on, most of which are free and open to the public as well. You'll find those there. And then without further ado, I will stop recording for the evening and wish everybody a wonderful rest of their day. Please go outside and enjoy the weather. I know it's getting a little bit darker, but it's still beautiful out.
Oh, cool. I just had a few people private message that they wanted to have a chat. So I don't know if you want to remain on here, and I could just.
I will remain on the call for the rest of the time until people pop off.
For the people that have some questions, I can stay on. Cole, you can go do. I don't need you can just leave it on and then come back.